Hi there, another bloody hypocrite here, YouTube's 34th least favourite ghoul, and I'm here to critique some of the ideas espoused by computer scientist and commentator Jaron Lanier. Before I begin, I want to make it clear that I like Lanier, and appreciate that he prompts people to think critically about the internet. However, I do disagree with much of his rhetoric around digital culture, the value of Web 2.0, and the looming threat of digital Maoism, which is a big part of this video essay. So let's get started. Back in 2006, Lanier published an essay on edge.com titled I promise I won't do it the whole way. Titled Digital Maoism, The Hazards of the New Online Collectivism. In this essay, Lanier argues that the internet has largely followed a misguided ideology that sees anonymous mass participation as an unmitigated good, and data as something that should be free and that belongs to everyone who can access it. And Lanier contends that this has been, on the whole, generally bad. Now you might have noticed that these beliefs pretty much underpin the epistemology and the ethics of the web as we know it. So when Lanier says that these beliefs are problems, he's levelling a fairly serious critique here, and it's one he has repeated in various books and talks on the subject, so I think it's worth exploring. Essentially, Lanier believes that digital Maoism has resulted in the spread of misinformation and low-quality journalism online, caused art and creativity to stagnate, enabled social media giants to extract huge amounts of data from their user base, and can be best fixed through a system of data dignity where users are paid when their data is accessed. Okay, so far so radical, and I've got to say I sympathise with a lot of Lanier's concerns, but I think there are some problems with his diagnosis of digital Maoism and even with his proposed solution. So first, I want to talk about an example that Lanier uses a lot to critique Web 2.0, and that is Wikipedia. In the original essay on digital Maoism, Lanier suggests that its open source nature makes it unreliable, since it can be edited by anyone, and that because it is the product of a faceless online collective, it strips its information of context and flavour while giving it an unearned air of authority. Furthermore, he suggests that Wikipedia is kind of unnecessary because most of its content can be found elsewhere. However, this is kind of misguided. As Lanier has conceded, Wikipedia has actually shown accuracy that is comparable to that of traditional encyclopedias, and responses to the original Digital Maoism essay, as well as yours truly here, would further point out that Wikipedia comes with a talk page, which provides the long and painful record of whiny bitching and nitpicking that produced the article. It supplies, if you will, the context that Lanier claims is missing. Also, Lanier's criticism of Wikipedia erroneously suggests that people read encyclopedias for the flavour of the text. But encyclopedias aren't Shakespeare, it's information condensed from already existing sources. And it makes even less sense to critique Wikipedia for not providing new information, since again, that's not what we use encyclopedias for. We want our encyclopedias to be a reflection of already existing content. No one wants or needs a maverick encyclopedia that plays by its own rules, just like no one wants or needs a calculator that comes to its own conclusions about math. This unwarranted cynicism about open source projects is one that he extends to a lot of Web 2.0, but crucially, often while underestimating the duplicity of conventional media. Especially in his TED Talks, Lanier seems very optimistic about what would happen if we could just get rid of social media. But this sort of ignores the role of propaganda and misinformation in traditional media. While Twitter does no doubt play a role in how fucked our politics are, Fox News, the tabloid press and chain letters were doing a fine job of turning people's brains to mush well before the World Wide Web. But that's enough on misinformation. On a different note, Lanier has a lot to say about art and music. You see, Lanier's a creative guy and a very interesting musician, and it is his belief that Web 2.0 has harmed creativity by disincentivizing quality in favour of what we might term shitposting. To evidence his hypothesis, he points to the stagnation of pop culture and invites comparison between the quality offered by online paid services and free user-generated content. One such comparison he makes use of is that of YouTube versus Netflix, which he claims demonstrates the superiority of the paid model over digital Maoism. But this is a suspect comparison for a bunch of reasons. First of all, the majority of the content on Netflix was produced by huge studios that later sold streaming rights to Netflix. The Netflix model of digital distribution didn't fund the majority of the shows that Lanier might consider to be peak TV. And when you consider the work produced by H-Bomber-Guy, ContraPoints or iDubbbz, which for me personally outshines a lot of the gack that ends up being produced as Netflix originals, the contrast that Lanier points to in quality starts to fade a bit. The comparison further fails when you consider that a lot of the gap in quality between Netflix and YouTube is just down to accessibility. Netflix will naturally produce a higher percentage of quality work, because you have to be part of a media team to get your work in there in the first place. But ultimately, there's room and value for both models. A curated space like Netflix is great when you want to watch old box sets or the latest primetime show, but YouTube has the ability to cater to niches and has a participatory ethic that Netflix will never really have, and so I don't really see the sense in comparing the two in the way that Jaron does. As for pop music, Jaron outlined a lot of his criticisms in an open letter on his website titled "Where Did the Music Go?" Oh, sweet Jesus, that website design. Jaron, what are you doing? Ugh. Similar criticisms appear in You Are Not a Gadget, where Lanier argues that there's no new pop music and that all we have is the rehash of older cultures. In the letter, but more so in You Are Not a Gadget, Lanier advances his position that youth culture is focused on remixing what already exists, and it's lost the ability to create genuinely new stuff that can form a new pop culture. And I bring this up because what is interesting here is not whether his diagnosis is true or not, but that pop music and pop culture is largely controlled by conglomerates who paywall and monetize their content. So I just want to leave a note here on the way that Lanier's argument has interestingly backfired, leaving him trying to pin the paucity of ideas in commercial pop on the digital sharing culture that has historically and culturally opposed it. And this talk of paid versus free content finally brings me to Lanier's idea for digital enclosure. The specifics aren't too important, but in a New York Times op-ed, Lanier articulates the idea for a MID, a mediator of individual data. A MID is intended as a sort of digital guild or union that you can sign up to, and it tracks your data and barters with people who want to purchase your data before eventually paying the money to you via either lump sums or a trickle of micropayments. Now, I actually think it is an interesting idea, but I can see another problem here, one that concerns the definition of data. See, data is just information. And that's a problem if we're going to say that using data generated by another person's existence should cost us money. It's fairly straightforward to see how MIDs would interact with Instagram or Google, but what about data that is gathered from an electronic point of sale, or EPOS systems like the one at your local supermarket? Executives gather data from this to use in making predictions, they evaluate pricing strategies and trends in customer purchasing habits using this data. Is this data to be monetized? How would it be monetized? Would a small-time business owner have to pay his customers a micro-fee just for keeping track of his own sales? What about foot traffic that might be measured by, say, a rail service or a shopping centre? If Jaron Lanier runs a sandwich parlour and he wants to know what his competitors are offering, does he have to shove cash in their hands to get access to that, or is he allowed to just look at their billboard? The idea that you own your data is a very nice one, but it carries with it some philosophical hurdles. There's no good reason to say that one owns their digital data but not their analog data, and ultimately I think Lanier might be too optimistic about legislators' ability to discern meaningfully between the two. But that's perhaps a minor niggle. On balance, I think a world in which the average user owned their data, and where advertisers and big data conglomerates would have to pay and notify users in order to use their posts for their research, would be a really nice world to live in, even if the philosophy of data ownership that underpinned it was a bit shaky. So to summarise, Lanier's criticism of Web 2.0 seems a little hyperbolic to me. Misinformation isn't unique to social media and open source projects, and these things often provide a transparency and a sense of democratization that traditional media struggles to match. And while I find Lanier's use of the term Maoism to be a little laughable, even crankish, I'm glad he's writing, and I'm glad he's getting people to think about alternative forms of the internet. And yeah, that's my lot. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, then why not check out some of my others? None of them are any good, but they are interesting. Well, to me.